Welcome back, everyone, to STM TV. This webinar, we're going to be talking about navigating PR between TradFi and Web3 media, and we're joined by none other than an expert in this space, Sam Amsterdam from Amsterdam Group Public Relations. Sam, how are you today?
I'm very well, Jason. How are you?
Doing well, doing well. Really excited to dive into all things PR, especially in this space, which, as we all know, it's a tough thing to navigate. But before we do that, why don't you give us some background on you? Let's meet Sam.
Well, thank you, Jason, and to the team at Security Token Market. My name is Sam Amsterdam. I founded Amsterdam Group Public Relations in 2006, about the time that multinational corporations to small to medium-sized enterprises started to figure out that they needed a digital presence, that movers and shakers, prospective investors, friends and family would be doing their own independent due diligence about themselves, about their brands. And one of the best ways to move the needle, be it for donations, grant allocations, investments, public perception, is what is found on search engines. And so, I established the practice with a moniker of social media public relations. But as we started to grow, I did take note of and began to really appreciate the importance of broadsheet media, traditional media relations, establishing with newsworthy content relationships with journalists who have academic certifications, real influencers in the space, to help tell my clients' narratives, be they geopolitical, be they commercial, be they across any industry you can think of. We've done work in the nonprofit space, working with academic institutions, in aviation and technology and financial technology, all over the world, from Kazakhstan to Nigeria to North America and beyond, in numerous languages. And I'm most proud of the team that I have alongside me that truly understand the strategy and the client's needs at the time, and in the most accountable fashion, and I'm trying to say this without any bias, really do move the needle and deliver earned media visibility, thoughtful and timely digital content, and garner event opportunities for our clients where it matters most, like at Tokenize This.
I'm sure we'll touch on that later on, Sam. And, we appreciate all you do in this space. Thank you for the background. And just to expand on it, how did you kind of foray into digital assets? It sounds like you have experience in multiple industries, which is fantastic. I think you get to learn the do's and don'ts in one industry, and maybe it does not apply to another. But how did you get into digital assets?
I was really intrigued about the arena of digital assets. And it wasn't not just was I personally really intrigued. I was intrigued at how intrigued the international media marketplace is about the ebbs and flows of real world assets, of digital assets, of the future of decentralized finance in all of its forms. The tokenization model and how there's no one size fits all tokenization model. Compliance, the ever changing face of the regulatory environment, nation on nation. Without even having to go to Google, you're bombarded with coverage. And yet I found at that juncture, when I started to become aware, even as a layman in the space, that there was a lack of brand differentiation and distinction beyond the Bitcoins of the world. And so I had as a public relations practitioner, I obviously saw an opportunity to help clients present and future establish themselves in the space, not because they hadn't already established themselves with the investment community, but that they hadn't necessarily begun the process of interacting with the media in this regard. That was probably by design, but it's, how you create introductions that are on the merit of what the client is bringing to the fore, with journalists that are writing about the subject matter and continuing to write about the subject matter. So you're not pulling any strings or asking for favors. It's a natural extension of their ongoing media coverage. So it is truly a mutually beneficial endeavor across the board. And I'm very proud to be an intermediary in that process.
Really, really interesting. I think that's a great segue too, to kind of talking about the meat and potatoes of the conversation here, which is how does real world assets interact with PR today? So can you tell us more about the state of DeFi and Web3 in public relations as it is today?
I think it's really interesting. There's obviously from my experience, there's obviously an appetite for expert commentary, and that's fantastic. And that's because the it's a moving target. The ebbs and flows of decentralized finance, of real world assets, because real world assets are so diverse in nature, and so it's important for thought leaders, well, for CEOs, frankly, to become thought leaders in the press overnight. They've obviously established the bona fides for themselves, developed these businesses cross sector, and now it's about talking about their tokenization model, but moreover, the future of the tokenization industry as a collective. And again, I found blue ocean, as they say. I found that there was a tremendous opportunity to bring new players to the arena of international media, to the arena of globally recognized events. If you look at, for example, Fortune magazine, which is a tremendous publication, obviously, and perhaps the gold standard of decentralized financial coverage. They have an annual summit taking place on November 11th in New York City with a significant focus on the future of decentralized finance. That's a first. I might even go so far as to suggest that every year up until this year, they've had their event in Abu Dhabi, and now they're congregating on New York City. Does that have to do with ebbs and flows in decentralized finance, or the fact that the main stage will be specifically regarding decentralized finance? I'm not sure. But I think the barometer in terms of media attention and receptiveness to movers and shakers, not only who are bringing newsworthy content and announcements to the arena of DeFi, to the arena of real world assets, but are able to speak out about the good actors and the bad actors that they're seeing in the news cycle in the Associated Press of the world, the Reuters of the world. That has been frenetically evolving.
Really interesting. And, that's a magazine that's typically, more related to TradFi. So great to see that they're starting to, cover DeFi. In your experience, would you say that the DeFi space is being covered more so in written content, or are we starting to see more video / live broadcast interviews, the Bloombergs of the world that we've seen, right? So what would your take be on that?
Absolutely. I think it's absolutely going the way of broadcast multimedia content, shorter snippets on the social media platforms of established brands like Bloomberg, 30-second downloadable content opportunities. Written content is fantastic because it really does live on in perpetuity on search engines. It's easier to come across to get a sort of comprehensive understanding of the state of play of a given subject. But we're seeing it would have been far-fetched at one point for Bloomberg to have a broadcast segment specific to real world assets. It was almost seen as not yet mature enough as an opportunity or as an industry, if you will, for Bloomberg to take seriously. And now, any news outlet would be completely remiss if they didn't have a segment devoted to cryptocurrency, devoted to real world assets. You're seeing that with CNBC. You're seeing that with ABC. There's a dedicated section that appeals directly to the ever-growing investment community. And I think, when obviously for most of the clients that I work with, there are choice investors, there are choice partners that they have thought meticulously about as a team internally. But there's also the layman investor. There's also a lack of education for those that are coming to the world of digital assets for the first time, of folks who can speak in a thought leadership-based capacity. And so, at this very unique intersection where there's a deficit of thought leadership to this day, I find myself and the organization, like so many different PR practitioners like me, at a really interesting juncture. But it's up to us to take advantage of it.
Yeah, and that's interesting that you bring up too, specific segments for this space, because I remember, a couple of years ago, one of our industry partners was, on Bloomberg talking about the space. I'm like, oh my God, like I would not have imagined this possible and so it's really cool to see. I recorded it on my phone too, just to have it. But we are seeing that a little bit more lately, and it's cool to see that the channels are starting to embrace this and realize that this is a technology that's not going away anytime soon, and you might as well start covering it because of the adoption that's going on, both retail and institutionally. And with that in mind, when as we continue to kind of dive into what, again, DeFi and PR looks like today, are you finding that people are targeting more so to get brand awareness out there so that the rest of the industry kind of knows what they're up to? Or are they really targeting specific investors to try to get more investment dollars into tokenized assets?
I think it's a combination of both. I think you can be very strategic and engage directly with prospective partners that you'd like to collaborate with and make sure that, what you're bringing to the fore is of relevance to their investment strategy. And I think that goes without saying, but I do think that one can be very tactical also about the choice publications and broadcasting houses that are today's coffee table books for those investors, where they can't miss seeing that third-party endorsement, that celebrity, if you will, of a given brand. And there are catch-all publications and broadsheets. I mean, who would have thought that USA Today would have such a frenetic focus on the ebbs and flows of real-world assets? The evolution of American Banker covering the space. It's not to name drop, but it is, really you want to do a little bit of both as a brand, I would think. And where we come in is helping establish not those relationships for the first time, but really being that connective tissue between influencers who, for example, media influencers at American Banker tend to also be the organizing chairs of their events every year. And so being able to connect those dots turns out to be a real force multiplier for consistent and on merit visibility.
That makes sense. And those relationships matter. I think that's something you guys do really well, is maintaining those and understanding too, who wants to cover what's their palette look like in terms of, what coverage, what the best news might be for them. With that in mind, before we kind of keep going into, the details of how we approach this, I know for the audience, a lot of them are wondering, how they would approach this for their own offerings, for their own platforms. I'll take a break here to tell the audience, happy to join us. Thank you for subscribing and joining STM TV. If you have any questions, feel free to insert them in the comments of either X or Twitter, LinkedIn or YouTube, and we'll go ahead and start filtering them in for Sam to touch on. With that in mind, Sam, thank you for the state of DeFi there. Why don't we dive into what is public relations actually? Because I think there's a misconception of, what is public relations versus marketing, and people sometimes tend to blend the two. So can you kind of explain to us the concept there and what it really means?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, effective public relations not only encapsulates earned media content and the curation of interview opportunities in the press. It's also about collaborating on thought leadership pieces, putting a flag on the map. For example, ahead of a given speaking engagement, say Tokenize This, and say Tokenize This was in Miami. My client and I would collaborate on a media relations strategy that's entirely on merits ahead of touching down in Miami for Tokenize This. So on the public relations front, what would that look like? That might look like an op-ed to be placed in the Miami Herald, and placed, again, you're pitching an op-ed editor at the Miami Herald. This is an exchange. We're offering newsworthy, incisive information and otherwise unavailable intelligence for that space on their pages in print and online. That might also include working with a financial analyst that might take interest in the central narrative of the op-ed to write a piece themselves, and again, it's an inquiry. It might be securing interviews on the sidelines of the event, finding out who will also be attending the event from the media world. And then it would be about really three-dimensionalizing a strategy that moves their brand by ebbs and flows throughout the duration of the event. Theoretically, public relations can also adopt certain marketing tenets like sponsored advertising, but typically that falls more into the marketing and advertising category, where you are basically client side and fielding the work of different agencies that are looking to assist you owning the space on a paid basis. And there are pros and cons of both. But I think an effective public relations strategy dovetails nicely into an effective marketing strategy in that light.
Really interesting there. So it sounds like PR is more so strategy, creating value, more about the message itself and driving a narrative, whereas marketing is a little bit more straightforward. Here's what it is. You can kind of tell that it was somewhat paid. The ads that we get on our phones or emails and just seeing, cool banners and stuff. Both effective to your point, but for different audiences, it sounds like. The PR, go ahead.
Oh, I mean, I think the idea is before one touches down in Miami or before one touches down in Singapore, that there is not only is there fantastic signage at the event, but when folks are leaving their hotel rooms to come to the event in Singapore, they pick up a copy of the Straits Times, and there on page one, ideally, is said client.
Interesting. So there's a strategy to the madness here. It's not just, hey, let me get a story out here and interview there. It's how do we see this kind of building on top of each other and really creating that story, again, driving the end user or the end reader, I should say, to understand what we're trying to accomplish here. And it's multiple touch points. Also, it sounds like different mediums to get to them. To your, and as you kind of laid out in your example here. Excuse me. With Amsterdam Group, tell us a little bit more about, kind of like, I'm curious personally too, on what you guys kind of do in terms of services that cover both the PR and the marketing side. Because it sounds like you guys are a well-rounded firm, but I'm curious to see what you guys specialize in.
Well, it's I appreciate it, and it's diverse, and it's been evolutionary since our inception. I think our forte, we're strong at everything we put our minds to be sure, but we're the most storied in media relations. We're the most storied in working with op-ed editors, journalists cross-sector, digital influencers. I mean, in the era of citizen journalism, one can portray themselves as a journalist very quickly. Brands become legitimized as media brands almost overnight. We need to be cognizant of that process and engage those journalists with or without academic certification in real time. So media relations, interview securement, op-ed generation in tandem with the thought leaders of the clients that we're privileged to represent is part and parcel of our service. Event coordination, working with fantastic organizers at events internationally, both from a marketing standpoint on a sponsored basis, because these are very competitive waters, and also on an earned basis for dais participation on merit. Those are very important from the event standpoint, because not only if it's a media branded event like a Fortune or the Wall Street Journal's Tech Live Summit or Tokenize This, will you have an opportunity to have your brand live on in perpetuity on WSJ.com, on Fortune.com, because most of these are taped, and they'll go out across the branded social media channels accordingly of the respective brands. But also you create paths of least resistance to prospective partners and investors who are sitting next to you physically. So, is it worth the flight to New York? 10 times out of 10, absolutely. Social media, graphic design, content curation, structured dissemination, enlisting the support of influencers with stronger followerships to start retweeting your content. Again, this is a mutually beneficial exchange of information and space. And that's really public relations 101.
Really interesting. And you touched on something there too that caught my attention, was international. What would you say is the approach? Does it differ in the US versus non-US jurisdictions and areas? Are there certain things that we have to look out for from a cultural standpoint? How do you approach PR in other waters?
It's a really good question. And I think you're safest to go with a universal model. And we as public relations practitioners might tweak the engagement before we bring the client into the interview, out of an abundance of caution, because there's, we no one nation or no one publication is really alike from the other. So we are the first line of offense, if you will. We're the first people out the door that are liaising with the journalists. And we've got terrific stories. We've got war stories in doing that. But, we would rather be the ones that are pestering, if you will, the journalists than our clients. And 9 times out of 10, the journalists understand that that's a part of our process. We are dogged in making sure that, if you have to think about a journalist's inbox, they get thousands, if not tens of thousands of emails a day. These are serious influencers. This is MarketWatch. This is the Wall Street Journal. This is the New York Times. This is not your cousin's blog site that he launched last week. So it's with that in mind, our bona fides are the fact that when one of our names pops up as a sender, the journalist stops scrolling and logs on. And it might be easier in some nations that are starting to sort of adopt a focus for cryptocurrency, for real world assets, because it's in its infancy, the media community in that regard. But more often than not, the universal approach, and one that we've honed as a team, works.
Really cool. Yeah. And to your point on the inboxes, I'm sure. I mean, I personally, in cold emailed some people and have gotten nothing. And I thought it was a great headline on subject line. But again, it comes down to, who does that person already have a relationship with said journalist? And it sounds like, you guys do, especially if you guys feed them, really good quality content. They know that what you're already sending them is kind of like pre-vetted by Amsterdam Group to understand like, yeah, this is something that we know could be of interest for you and what you typically cover.
Absolutely, Jason. And
Yeah,
sorry not to interrupt, but it's
it's
you have to do your homework. You have to. It may not be what you want to do as a PR practitioner on a regular basis. It's nobody in the PR industry doesn't love the thrill of getting a win for their client. It's addictive, but you have to do your reading. You have to not just what your clients are saying and what they're doing, but also what the journalists are writing about. When they do open that email, they're going to read that email. And if that email is a boilerplate pitch, you're out of there, not just for that opportunity, potentially as well. So, I really liked your article about and again, this is not a boilerplate. You have to then get into B and C as to why you like that article, and it needs to be genuine. And so the pitch process is not easy. It's I think something that even ChatGPT might find difficult, but don't quote me because that could change.
for sure. And while we're on the topic here of do's and don'ts of Web3 PR, Web3 does come with a certain connotation when you start mentioning blockchain, and people get a little wary about securities laws and so forth. So, how would you approach the pitch in general? Is it more so the narrative of like, here's what we're enabling, or do you get into the nitty gritty? And I'm sure that kind of depends on the audience, of course, but wanted to get your take on that approach.
Well, I think it's, much like going on camera with a network for the first time. I think, or as importantly, having an interview, a long form interview with a journalist. You need to have agreed upon terms before you sit down. And also, more specifically with the print and online front, the on or off record rule. If you're only able to provide background information because of regulatory issues at the time, an abundance of caution, that's all well and good. I think one needs to be careful not to overspeak. There are tips, most specifically in the ever-changing regulatory environment around Web3. What you don't say sometimes is as important as what you do say. And I think being measured in terms of engaging, picking and choosing your battles, being measured in terms of what you say to a journalist, agreeing upon terms, working with our team beforehand or a team to prepare. You want to three-dimensionalize the opportunity and know what you get out of it. And then being, ever respectful for the journalist's questions. And what I've seen happen all the time is if you don't have the answer right then, don't feel compelled to fill in the gaps and get called out for it later. If a journalist stops talking, don't feel the need to overspeak. I mean, this is an opportunity for you to build trust, and building trust is we can bring you to the opportunity, but it's then on you to take it forward.
That makes sense. Some really cool points on there. You want to agreed upon terms. You want to prepare ahead of time. I think a lot of people approach some of these interviews with no prep at all. And they're like, yeah, I know my business in and out. I can answer anything. And it's like, hold up, but how do you answer that? Is a whole different ball game, if you will. And a great other points there. On one of the don'ts that you just mentioned, I kind of want to dive deeper. If there's a question that, I'm on Bloomberg, for example, or you're on Bloomberg, and someone asks us a question that we just don't feel comfortable answering, but we don't want to dodge it either. How do you kind of pivot around that question is still be able to kind of move forward with the interview and kind of signal to the person too, hey, let's move on?
Yeah. Well, if there's a question, for example, crypto.com suing the SEC, there may be a sensitive topic for an organization to outright address and thus get picked up in the news cycle for all to see. So I think you take a step back in answering the question and you say, listen, it's an important question. It's a seminal moment in the history of free speech and the evolution of media in the arena of decentralized finance and the regulatory environment that has moved in some countries at a snail's pace and in other countries lightning fast. But I think what's important to focus on is A, B, and C. D, dovetail to your brand.
Nice. Yeah. What other, key things that you think that, for anyone that's watching, by the way, reminder, if you just joined us, go ahead and submit those questions and we'll be filtering them in. For people watching, some people have never been on some of these publications and whatnot. And I'm sure something that everyone is thinking about is how do we get to top tier media coverage? There's smaller media brands that people kind of dip their toes in to start getting some name recognition out there. But of course, everyone's goal is to be on the bigger names. So what would you say are some strategies to approach those big names?
I think it would be a value. It doesn't have to be me by any stretch of the imagination, but it would be a value. It would be a value to have a consultation with a public relations consultancy or a practitioner. Doing your own PR, first of all, can be a futile exercise because it's a lot of punching up to get the attention of a foreign correspondent. I'm being very broad here, a Web3 correspondent, or you get into the lion's den, so to speak, and you're unprepared for the line of questioning to come. Or it's one would be dogged, but it ends up going nowhere, and you're wasting precious time and thus money. So I think having that initial discussion, and obviously the public relations practitioner is going to tell you, here's what I would do for you. But even submitting yourself to sort of an audit, if you will, or overview of what it is you want to say and what the return on investment ultimately will be, getting their guidance, be it through a media training, even for an hour, equips you with life lessons in the arena of media relations. How you approach a journalist, how you talk to a journalist, what you're okay to divulge, what you're okay to attach. It's these are in this day and age very, very important, because one wrong move in the arena of public relations, and it's a crisis communication standpoint, and you need to hire a firm to fix the glitch. So you want to operate very methodically, and I do think that you want to speak to an expert in the arena that can help you tell your story in a merit-based way. I mean, again, while with advertising, for example, if you're working with a major American broadsheet and you're talking about the quarter page of page 2, sponsoring that page could be between $50,000 and $80,000. Well, for you to get that space on merit, you really want to talk to somebody that's worked in that industry, that can talk about, what are the fundamentals that you want to get across? How do you engage and create trust with the journalist for recurring expert commentary? And that's how where we would come in.
Really, really interesting there. Yeah, and again, that's something that everyone wants to accomplish. So with that in mind, we are covering strategies here for getting that top tier, recognition and coverage. Production, if you guys can bring up a slide that we have for this segment here, why don't you tell us, Sam, a little bit more about those strategies and so forth.
Sure. So I mean, we are, in essence, as I said, I would welcome being a kind ear to a preliminary consultation with as per a preliminary consultation with any individual or organization that wants to learn more about what they can do to heighten the reputation or brand equity of their organization, even if it's their own individual profile. That being said, we as a public relations firm, I think, fancy ourselves as fairly lean and mean in being able to tell the story of the brand in a compelling way, both through first-person op-ed drafting and placement, working with others in the given community, be it Web3 or otherwise, to have interactive discussions and work together on third-party columns that help tell that story. Certainly interview securement in the online podcast, traditional broadcast, even radio, and print arena. In addition to social media, search engine optimization, graphic design, and event coordination endeavors. That's a lot in a hurry, but collectively, that's what 2024 era public relations is. It should be fairly turnkey in terms of, if you enlist the services of a public relations firm, they go to work for you holistically. You can ask questions, you can have deliverables in the arena of earned visibility, and it's up to us to find the answers. And that's what we pride ourselves on doing. If anything else, not just because of the success that we bring to the table for our clients, I think it's the accountability that we bring that really makes us unique. But we can go on beyond this slide. And what I would say, I think we can keep going. I think realistically, this is sort of a background document that speaks to my firm, but like so many PR firms, what they look to do for their clients in storytelling. It's about establishing trust versus paying for trust. And when you're paying for trust, it's somewhat artificial. So we can, yeah, really to the point I previously made, it's working with third parties for subject matter, influential oriented positioning, global media relations. All media today knows no border, whether it's US media, whether it's media in the UK. I mean, really, the trickle down effect. For example, if you have an op-ed in Euronews, quite likely it's going to get picked up by aggregators like Yahoo and MSN.com. Press release, generation and distribution. One of the things that's important for me to stress is, it is great to issue a press release regarding an announcement. And sometimes for compliance purposes, for regulatory purposes, you want to issue a press release in your own words first. You need to. There are other times where PR Newswire and Business Wire can be very expensive endeavors. And it's better to have a journalist break your story as news and you reinforce it in your own words on a more cost-effective basis than break the bank. We typically support delegation visits, but delegation visits are not only if you are a government that's coming to the United States or Canada. Delegation visits really means if you have a business delegation, a group of individuals that are coming to an event, what can we do to three-dimensionalize that opportunity? You've paid a lot in flight and accommodation. What can we do to make sure that you have a series of interviews that land in quick succession over the course of your expedition? That achieves a level of visibility where folks can't miss you. Those that are in the room, those that you're speaking next to, and that's what we like to bring to the fore as well. Unlike others in the public relations arena, we're fairly 24/7, almost to a fault. We have really unique methodologies to leave ourselves available for real response interfacing with our clients. A lot of organizations in the PR arena, the big boys and girls, if you will, I used to work for them. I learned a lot about what to do and about collating media databases and engagement. But there was a degree of smoke and mirrors, I guess, in terms of accountability of service delivery. And we are results driven. And typically with our clients, we operate on a month-to-month basis. And that's allowed us to, the real diplomas on the wall are the years that we've been with our clients, rather than so many of our competitors. And then reportage is everything. PR can seem intangible. I had a hidden fortune. Well, what does that mean? I can frame it and put it on the wall. Well, that's terrific. But what is your share of voice? Who are your competitors, if any? And what are the keywords that they're paying attention to where you want to have space? And how can we measure share of voice? And we are, I'm a client of numerous technologies that we adopt in-house that give you on a real-time basis, share of voice metrics. And you can see how good we're doing on a weekly basis and make that determination to keep us or otherwise, ideally keep us. And really that's it. I mean, it's important for your PR agency, whoever it is, to show you their work. They don't need to show you their pitches necessarily. Sometimes for ethical reasons and creative reasons. If the PR practitioner knows the journalist, what the journalist is paying attention to, you don't want to haggle over that with said client. But I think it's important to have a very accountable and an evolutionary agenda that outlines the targets, the themes, and really collaborates with your client on how you're going to assert a degree of thought leadership, ownership in what will be, if not already is, a very competitive space in the Web3 and DeFi public relations arena. And we can, yeah, I mean, when it comes to the media, almost anybody can be an influencer, if you will, overnight, be you a celebrity or otherwise. But we work with think tank senior fellows, financial analysts, retired television pundits, retired politicians, you name it, introducing them to our clients and looking to establish if they are interested in writing a story on the work that they're doing and why it dovetails nicely into some of the sort of seminal moments of the day in the news cycle. And then ultimately, we are accountable to our clients by what they find on search engines. How are we, if we get a hidden fortune, do we need a press release that talks about that fantastic article? If we have an announcement to make, how do we three-dimensionalize that announcement so that there's not just one press release, but there's 16 different links to that cite that press release? It's our job to make sure that when broader themes related to a client steer are queried on search engines, that they find what we want them to find. We've named here a number of just example publications and broadcasting houses where for our clients we've had visibility. I'd be obviously happy to share more specific examples, but I really think for the purposes of this discussion, we're broadsheet meat and potatoes media relations practitioners that have terrific skill sets across all of the competencies that I've mentioned, and work very closely, again, on an on-merit basis with these journalists, with these media contributors to move the needle for our clients respectively.
Some really, really impressive names on here, man.
And sometimes you go to and meet with them in person, knock on the door. It's not easy, but when you have those relationships, it's nice to see a friendly pair of eyes in the room when you walk into a forum. For example, I was at a forum on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly. Wasn't at the UNGA myself, but when you're at a forum and you see somebody that's an influential journalist and they recognize you, and before they get onto the panel that they're moderating, they walk over to you and shake hands, and you develop rapport that are genuine. And that means you develop WhatsApp relationships where you can message, hey, do you have time to talk to my friend blank on Friday at 2 p.m.? You're not waiting weeks for this sort of engagement. It's typically hours or days. And then, not necessarily relevant, perhaps it would be for the purposes of this discussion, but we work very closely with think tanks. We help coordinate events in addition to working with fantastic event organizers like the STM team to ensure that we are achieving the visibility that our clients deserve. And these are just some examples of other events, external events, that certainly have relevance to the Web3 space, and they do even more so now, as I've made mention of, but then also have just historically been, fantastic convenings of thought leaders, policymakers, business iconoclasts that we're privileged to have had positioning secured for our clients.
Fantastic. No, I appreciate that. And I think these slides are great for a couple of reasons. Obviously, first, people get to understand what you guys really do at AGPR. But second, I think it helps people start ideating. Like, there's more to PR than just the article, the press release, and the interview. There's more to think about, more thought leadership opportunities that people, I think, sometimes, kind of forget to think about in terms of how they're going to implement that, what they want to do. And so forth. So I appreciate that.
It's a fine line. It's not, you can't be passive in PR. You really need to be pragmatic. You need to be careful. You don't want to, we try to make it as far away from a roll of the dice as possible when you're building a brand. And also, to an earlier point about building a brand, how you start a media relations campaign is as important as how you finish it. If you're starting with a no-name publication, with all due respect to those publications, you're delaying the process of visibility by months, of tier one visibility by a long time. You've really got to work with folks that have established relationships with the tier one media, so that you can begin your campaign in an impactful way.
That makes sense, right? I'm sure SEO has something to do with that too. Figuring out, hey, where has this name been? But also how people in general perceive it. If I'm STM, I'm doing my research on the industry, and I see that this person was covered in a lesser name publication only. That starts giving me, at least on the subconscious level, a thought of, is this real or not?
That's right.
Which actually has happened with some offerings.
No question.
Yeah. So with all that in mind, there's a lot of good stuff here, Sam. Once again, anyone that has Q&As, questions, go ahead and throw them in. But before we dive into that, again, there were a lot of ideas spoken about here and a lot of great tips. But I would assume that PR is not a one size fits all situation. I think it probably varies by industry, it probably varies by company, and what the goal is. So can you tell us a little bit more about how you approach really customizing Web3 PR for your variety of clients that you guys have?
Well, yeah, Web3 PR, the real world asset, so to speak, PR, and they dovetail sort of together. There is no one size fits all model, because the assets, the ecosystems will differ dramatically. And sometimes you want to when you're producing a pipeline, if you will, of media opportunities, you not only want to speak to the fantastic CoinDesks of the world or Cointelegraphs and those that are a natural fit for the industry. CoinDesk TV, speaking to evolutions from print to broadcast or online to broadcast. But you also want to go to the verticals that speak to their industry, be it healthcare or otherwise, be it, it can be very diverse. be it minerals. It's cross sector, but the idea is really that you want to speak to the thematic verticals in the TradFi space, the publications that are in the TradFi space, in addition to those Web3 publications and broadcasting houses of note. So there is no, when you're thinking of choice publications, choice broadcasts, choice events, you need to use a scalpel rather than a broadsword to pick out those opportunities that benefit the specific client.
That's really an interesting point there. If I have a client too that's looking to, tokenize something in the biotech space, I might look at, okay, well, it doesn't just affect potential investors that you're trying to reach, but how does that community, where does that community gather? How do they learn about what's going on? Because I'm sure, like anyone in their space, if they're responsible, they'll be keeping up with what's going on in that space. And part of it is reaching and educating that audience as well. So I like that, Sam. And it also goes to talk about customizing some of the options in terms of what you want to hit and what you don't. With that in mind, we do have a question that came in. How do I get asked to be an expert commentator? I know we maybe touched on it earlier, but it's something a little bit more of a strategy I can give here, Sam.
Very specifically, in addition to introductions that are fielded by your PR practitioner, we are constantly interacting. Said PR practitioner, if it's not us, it should be constantly interacting with journalists, whether it's to pitch clients or otherwise. What is it you're working on? Do you need an expert in natural resource extraction? Do you need an expert in geopolitical affairs? Do you need an expert in Web3? Great, let's connect you just for a 15-minute off record, no commitment background introduction. And 9 times out of 10, that introduction turns around into not just one, but a recurring expert commentary opportunity. I personally appreciate the cold call, but as I said earlier, I would advise against engaging with a journalist unless you've at least had the consultancy session or the consultation rather with a PR practitioner who could walk you through the newsworthiness of what you're trying to say.
Absolutely. Anyone watching, check out that link down below, AmsterdamGroup.net, hit them up. But no, I think you're absolutely right. You don't want to go in, especially if it's your first time, you don't want to go in without knowing how you're going to do it, what the appropriate way of doing it, but more importantly, being prepared to answer any questions that might come up from, that journalist and so forth. Another point that you brought up earlier on is crisis management. Let's say you have a PR crisis, something horrible happened either at the company or just some kind of scandal. I don't know, but how do you manage a crisis in PR?
Well, it's a, there are numerous ways. There is no one size fits all model to that either. There could be legal issues. There could be issues with an article that was not necessarily factual or a misquote situation. So it would really vary depending on the situation. We all can point to historic crises in communications in years past, from multinational corporations to small to medium-sized enterprises, and obviously with in the crypto arena. But there, you need to really operate in a very forward-facing and accountable way. You need to address the problem head on. You need to work to reinforce the overarching mission of the company. And again, there is no one-size-fits-all model to this. And then ideally, if you tell a compelling and authentic enough message, have others do the reinforcing for you to help neutralize what could be a story that was brought about unfairly.
Good to know. I think those are all great points there. Before closing it out, are there any topics that we haven't touched on yet that you think would be very valuable for anyone listening in to keep in mind?
I would just reinforce it and very much appreciate everyone's time today. And thank you for watching and listening in. I would just reinforce that this is a really tremendous opportunity in the arena of Web3 and in the overarching arena of decentralized finance, and also in the arena of TradFi. There is still a lack of understanding about the return on investment in the arena of decentralized finance and how the layman investor can get involved, and how and how the institutional investor can take advantage of a new niche, if you will, in the arena of Web3. There's an opportunity for thought leadership differentiation like never before, but these are very competitive waters. And in even months' time, that may be a totally different landscape. So it is imperative that you think about your brand, be it everything from what you use to build a website to what your storefront window, which is your social media presence, to the events that you want to be a part of, to the conversations that you want to have a seat at the table at, and then reverse engineer it and think about how you get there in a measured way, in an impactful way that moves the needle with consistency and accountability.
Fantastic. Sam, thank you so much. I think we all learned a lot on this webinar. I know I have for sure. Some really cool points there. For anyone watching, if you the replay will be available on YouTube, on STM TV, as well as where you've seen this on your socials as well. Go ahead and visit amsterdamgroup.net, set up a consultation. Sam obviously knows a lot about this space, both how to approach it from a Web3 perspective, as well as the TradFi, usual suspect big name publications. So I think that would be very beneficial for anyone. And of course, make sure to share this webinar with anyone else in the industry that you feel would benefit from these key points here. Sam, couldn't thank you enough, man. I think this was fantastic, and I'm sure we'll be able to do something similar again.
You're a terrific host. Thank you very much, guys, for the opportunity. I appreciate it.